The year was 1887, and Marcus Hawthorne stood at the edge of his vast Montana territory, watching another sunset paint the endless grasslands in shades of gold and crimson. At 34, he commanded over 50,000 acres of prime cattle. Land employed 47 ranch hands and possessed wealth that could buy entire towns. Yet as darkness crept across the horizon, the silence of his sprawling ranch house echoed with a loneliness that no amount of money could fill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Marcus couldn't have imagined was that in 3 days' time, a desperate transaction in the drought-stricken town of Cedar Falls would bring him face to face with a woman whose quiet strength would transform not just his empire, but his very soul. This is the story of how a business deal born from desperation became the foundation of the most powerful ranching dynasty the American West had ever known. The drought of 1887 had been merciless to the small farming communities scattered across the Montana Territory. Cedar Falls, once a thriving agricultural hub nestled in the valley between two mountain ranges, now resembled a ghost town clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. The railroad that had brought prosperity just 5 years earlier now carried away the last remnants of hope as families loaded their possessions onto freight cars bound for more forgiving lands. Eliza Whitmore sat in the cramped office of Cedar Falls' only remaining bank, her calloused hands folded tightly in her lap as she listened to the banker's words with growing dread. At 28, she had already buried one husband and watched her small farm wither under the relentless sun. The modest inheritance left by her late husband Thomas had dwindled to nothing, consumed by failed crops and mounting debts. "Mrs. Whitmore," banker Cornelius Blackwood said, his voice carrying the weight of unwelcome news, "I'm afraid your situation has become untenable. The bank can no longer extend your credit, and frankly, there's no market for your land in its current condition." He shuffled through papers on his desk, avoiding her steady gaze. "However, there may be one alternative." Eliza straightened in her chair, though she kept her voice measured. "What kind of alternative, Mr. Blackwood?" The banker cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's a gentleman from the Northern Territories, a cattle baron named Marcus Hawthorne, who's been acquiring properties throughout the region. He's expressed interest in purchasing not just land, but—" Blackwood paused, his face reddening slightly, "but also in securing a wife to manage his household affairs." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Eliza felt her breath catch, but her expression remained composed. She had heard whispers of such arrangements, born from the practical necessities of frontier life, where men outnumbered women by staggering margins and survival often trumped sentiment. "He's offering to settle all your debts," Blackwood continued quickly, "plus provide a substantial sum that would set up your younger sister with a proper dowry when she comes of age. In return, you would relocate to his ranch and assume the role of his wife and the mistress of his household." Eliza's mind raced through her limited options. Her sister Margaret, barely 16, worked long hours at the town's only remaining general store for wages that barely covered their meager meals. The girl deserved better than a life of endless struggle and fading dreams. As for herself, Eliza had long ago abandoned romantic notions about marriage. Her union with Thomas had been built on mutual respect and shared hardship rather than passionate love, and it had served them both well until consumption claimed him during the brutal winter of 1885. "What manner of man is this Mr. Hawthorne?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Blackwood seemed relieved by her practical response. "By all accounts, he's a fair and honorable businessman. Built his operation from nothing over the past 12 years. He's known for treating his employees well and honoring his contracts. The arrangement would be legal and binding, naturally, with proper documentation." That evening, Eliza walked the perimeter of the small plot of land that had been her world for the past 3 years. The wheat fields that Thomas had planted with such hope lay barren and cracked, claimed by the drought that seemed to mock every prayer for rain. The small cabin they had built together stood empty except for a few pieces of furniture and the memories that clung to its weathered walls. Margaret found her there as the first stars appeared in the clear sky. Her younger sister possessed the kind of delicate beauty that belonged in drawing rooms and parlors, not in the harsh realities of frontier survival. Golden hair caught moonlight like spun silk, and her blue eyes held an innocence that Eliza was determined to preserve. "Eliza, Mrs. Patterson says there's talk in town about you considering some kind of arrangement," Margaret said, settling beside her sister on the cabin's front steps. She seemed worried. Eliza chose her words carefully. "There's an opportunity that might provide security for both of us. A wealthy rancher in the Northern Territory is seeking a wife to manage his household. The financial terms would clear our debts and provide you with means for a proper future." Margaret's eyes widened. "You're thinking of marrying a stranger?" "I'm thinking of ensuring that you don't spend your best years scrubbing floors and mending other people's clothes," Eliza replied gently. "Thomas and I married as practical strangers, and we built something good together. Sometimes the heart follows where necessity leads." The younger woman was quiet for a long moment, studying her sister's profile in the starlight. "What do you know about this man?" "He's built a successful operation from nothing. He's known for fair dealing and keeping his word. Beyond that, I suppose I'll learn as I go." Eliza stood and brushed dust from her worn skirt. "The alternative is watching you waste away in this dying town while I lose what little remains of our family's dignity." 3 days later, Eliza stood in the Cedar Falls train station wearing her one good dress, a simple blue cotton garment that Thomas had bought for her birthday 2 years earlier. Her belongings fit into a single carpet bag, while her hopes and fears seemed to fill the entire depot. Margaret clung to her for a long moment, tears flowing freely despite her attempts at brave composure. "Write to me every week," Margaret whispered. "Promise me you'll write." "Every week without fail," Eliza assured her, though she wondered what she would find to say about a life she couldn't yet imagine. The train to Marcus Hawthorne's territory took 18 hours, carrying her through landscapes that grew increasingly wild and magnificent. Rolling hills gave way to vast expanses of grassland that stretched to meet an endless sky. Cattle dotted the distance like dark specks against the golden prairie, and Eliza began to understand the scale of the world she was entering. At a small depot called Millbrook Station, she was met by a weathered man in his 50s who introduced himself as Samuel Ridge, foreman of the Hawthorne Ranch. His manner was respectful but reserved as he helped her into a sturdy wagon for the final leg of her journey. "Mr. Hawthorne asked me to extend his apologies for not meeting you personally," Samuel explained as they set off across a dirt road that seemed to disappear into the horizon. "He's dealing with a situation involving rustlers on the southern boundary. Should be resolved by the time we reach the main house." The ride took nearly 2 hours, during which Eliza said little but observed everything. The land here was different from the struggling farms around Cedar Falls. Despite the same drought conditions, the grass showed signs of careful management, and she noticed several windmills turning lazily in the constant breeze, drawing water from underground sources. Cattle moved in organized herds, tended by skilled horsemen who acknowledged Samuel's wagon with respectful waves. As they crested a low ridge, the Hawthorne Ranch spread out before them like a vision from a storybook. The main house was a 2-story structure built from local stone and timber, solid and imposing, yet somehow welcoming. Outbuildings stretched in orderly rows, including what appeared to be the largest barn Eliza had ever seen. Corrals held dozens of horses, and she could see men working with quiet efficiency at various tasks. "It's magnificent," she said softly, the first words she had spoken in over an hour. Samuel nodded with obvious pride. "Mr. Hawthorne built every bit of it himself, starting with nothing but a borrowed horse and more determination than sense." He's a good man, Mrs. Whitmore, fair and honest in all his dealings. The wagon pulled up to the main house just as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Eliza smoothed her skirts and checked that her hair remained properly pinned. As Samuel helped her down, her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression composed as the front door opened. Marcus Hawthorne emerged onto the wide porch, and Eliza felt her breath catch slightly. He was taller than she had expected, with dark hair touched by premature gray at the temples and brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were well made but practical, and his hands showed the calluses of a man who worked alongside his employees rather than simply directing them from a distance. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the space between the wagon and the porch. Then Marcus stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice deeper than she had anticipated. "Welcome to the Lazy H Ranch. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. The countryside is beautiful." Eliza accepted his offered hand as she stepped onto the porch, noting the strength and steadiness of his grip. "I imagine you're tired and would like to freshen up before dinner," he continued, opening the door for her. "Mrs. Coleman, my housekeeper, has prepared a room for you. We can discuss the details of our arrangement after you've had time to settle in." The interior of the house revealed the same blend of practicality and understated elegance as its exterior. Polished wood floors gleamed under the light of oil lamps, and comfortable furniture filled rooms that managed to feel spacious without being ostentatious. Mrs. Coleman, a motherly woman in her 60s, welcomed Eliza warmly and led her upstairs to a corner room with windows facing both east and south. "Mr. Hawthorne thought you'd enjoy the morning light," Mrs. Coleman explained as she set fresh towels on the washstand. "There's hot water in the pitcher, and dinner will be served in about an hour. Just come down to the main hall when you're ready." Alone in the room that would serve as her sanctuary during whatever came next, Eliza allowed herself a moment of uncertainty. Through the southern window, she could see the vast expanse of Marcus Hawthorne's domain, a kingdom built through vision and relentless work. Tomorrow, if all went according to plan, she would become its queen by virtue of a contract, rather than conquest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She unpacked her few belongings and changed into her other dress, a gray wool that had seen better days but remained respectable. As she arranged her hair in the mirror above the washstand, she caught sight of her own reflection and was surprised by what she saw. The woman looking back at her appeared calmer and more self-possessed than she felt, her green eyes steady despite the magnitude of the decision she was about to make. The sound of voices drifted up from the main floor, and Eliza realized that Marcus was not dining alone. As she made her way downstairs, she discovered that the evening meal was shared with Samuel Ridge and two other men who were introduced as the ranch's head wrangler and the supervisor of the farming operations that supplemented the cattle business. Conversation around the table was lively but respectful, covering topics from market prices to weather patterns to the ongoing challenges of managing such a vast operation. Eliza listened more than she spoke, but when Marcus asked for her thoughts on soil conservation techniques she had observed during her train journey, she found herself drawn into a discussion that revealed both his intelligence and his genuine interest in her opinions. As the evening wound down and the other men took their leave, Marcus walked Eliza to the bottom of the staircase. The house had grown quiet around them, filled with the comfortable sounds of a well-run household preparing for rest. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, then paused and started again. "Eliza, if I may, I want you to know that whatever decision you make about our proposed arrangement, you're welcome to remain here as long as you need to consider your options. This is not a situation where you should feel pressured or rushed." She studied his face in the lamplight, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. Instead, she found only the same quiet honesty that had marked their entire interaction. "I appreciate your consideration, Mr. Hawthorne, but I believe I've already made my decision." She paused, gathering her courage. "If your offer still stands, I'm prepared to accept it." Something shifted in his expression, a mixture of relief and what might have been anticipation. "Then we'll ride into Millbrook tomorrow morning to see about the legal formalities. Judge Harrison can perform the ceremony and witness the contracts." As Eliza climbed the stairs to her room, she felt the weight of her old life lifting from her shoulders like morning mist. Behind her lay the struggles and limitations that had defined her existence for 28 years. Ahead stretched possibilities she had never dared to imagine, in a land vast enough to hold whatever dreams she might discover the courage to pursue. Through her bedroom window, the lights of the bunkhouses twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere in the darkness she could hear the lowing of cattle and the distant call of a night bird. Tomorrow would bring a new name, a new role, and responsibilities she was only beginning to understand. But tonight, for the first time in years, Eliza Whitmore fell asleep without worrying about tomorrow's bread or next month's rent. The transformation had already begun. The morning of Eliza's wedding dawned clear and cold, with frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. She woke before sunrise, her stomach tight with nervous energy, and found that Mrs. Coleman had already laid out a breakfast tray and a simple but elegant cream-colored dress that she had never seen before. "Mr. Hawthorne thought you might prefer something new for the occasion," Mrs. Coleman explained when Eliza asked about the garment. "He sent Samuel into town yesterday evening to fetch it from the dressmaker. I hope the size is acceptable." The dress fit perfectly, its clean lines and quality fabric making Eliza feel more confident than she had in months. As she arranged her hair in the mirror, she noticed that her hands were steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. The woman reflected back at her and looked ready for whatever challenges the day might bring. The ride to Millbrook took 45 minutes, with Marcus handling the reins of his finest carriage while maintaining a respectful silence that allowed Eliza to gather her thoughts. The small town bustled with activity despite the early hour, and she noticed several people watching with obvious curiosity as they made their way to the courthouse. Judge Harrison turned out to be a dignified man in his 60s who had known Marcus for several years. His manner was both formal and kind as he explained the legal implications of their union, ensuring that Eliza understood her rights and responsibilities as Marcus's wife and partner in the ranch operations. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said gently, "this contract includes provisions that are quite generous by territorial standards. You will have full authority over household management, access to ranch accounts for legitimate expenses, and a personal allowance that is yours to use as you see fit. Should anything happen to Mr. Hawthorne, you would inherit half the ranch outright, with the remainder held in trust for any children you might have together." Eliza felt a flush of surprise at the fairness of the terms. Most women in arranged marriages received little more than room and board in exchange for their domestic services. Marcus had structured their agreement more like a business partnership than a traditional marriage contract. The ceremony itself was brief and practical, witnessed by Judge Harrison's clerk and the town's banker. When Marcus slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Eliza was struck by the solemnity of the moment. Whatever this union lacked in romance, it possessed genuine respect and mutual commitment to building something worthwhile together. "You may kiss your bride," Judge Harrison said with a slight smile. Marcus leaned forward and placed a gentle, almost chaste kiss on Eliza's lips. It lasted only a moment, but she detected warmth and perhaps a hint of promise in the gesture. When they separated, he offered her his arm with the same courtesy he had shown since her arrival. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, and the name sent an unexpected thrill through her. Their first stop after leaving the courthouse was the telegraph office, where Eliza sent word to Margaret that the ceremony had taken place and that she was well. She kept the message brief but reassuring, knowing that her sister would be anxiously awaiting news. As they prepared to leave town, Marcus guided the carriage to a small general store that doubled as the local post office. "I thought you might want to choose some personal items," he explained. "Things to make the house feel more like home." Inside the store, Eliza found herself overwhelmed by choices she hadn't been able to make in years. Marcus encouraged her to select whatever caught her fancy, from books to fabric to small luxuries that she had long considered beyond her reach. She chose carefully but allowed herself pleasures like a set of fine writing paper, several novels, and materials for needlework that would help occupy her hands during the long winter evenings ahead. The proprietor, a chatty woman named Mrs. Fitzgerald, clearly knew Marcus well and made no attempt to hide her curiosity about his new wife. "Mr. Hawthorne, you've been keeping secrets," she said with a knowing smile. "Mrs. Hawthorne is lovely. I do hope you'll both be very happy together." During the ride back to the ranch, Marcus seemed more relaxed than he had that morning. "I should tell you something about the household routine," he said as they traveled through the rolling grassland. "I'm usually up before dawn during cattle season, which runs from spring through late fall. I take breakfast with the men most mornings, but Mrs. Coleman serves dinner in the main house each evening. You're welcome to join us or take your meals separately, whatever you prefer." "I'd like to join you," Eliza replied. "I want to understand the operation and the people who work for you." Something in his expression suggested that her answer pleased him. "The men are good workers, but they can be rough around the edges. Most of them have never lived around a lady of refinement." "Mr. Hawthorne," Eliza said with a slight smile, "I've spent the last 3 years working my own land and dealing with creditors, drought, and every manner of hardship. I suspect you're ranch hands, and I will understand each other quite well." That evening, Eliza took her place at the dinner table as the new mistress of the Lazy H Ranch. The conversation was initially more subdued than it had been the night before, with the men clearly uncertain about how to behave around Marcus's new wife. But when Samuel Ridge mentioned concerns about a pregnant mare showing signs of distress, Eliza surprised everyone by offering practical advice based on her experience with livestock on her former farm. "You might try a warm mash with molasses," she suggested. "Sometimes when they're close to foaling, their appetite gets finicky, but the sweetness can tempt them to eat." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "That's sound thinking, Mrs. Hawthorne. I'll give it a try first thing tomorrow." As the days passed, Eliza began to find her rhythm in her new life. Her mornings were spent working with Mrs. Coleman to understand the complexities of managing such a large household. The ranch employed a dozen men year-round, with additional hands hired during busy seasons, and feeding and housing them required careful planning and considerable skill. She discovered that Marcus's operation was far more sophisticated than she had initially realized. In addition to cattle ranching, he maintained vegetable gardens, dairy cows, chickens, and even a small orchard that somehow thrived despite the challenging climate. Water management was crucial to everything, with an elaborate system of wells, windmills, and irrigation channels that required constant maintenance. "Your husband is one of the smartest men I've ever worked for," Mrs. Coleman confided as they planned the week's menus. "When he first arrived in this territory, folks thought he was crazy for trying to ranch in such dry country. But he studied the land, learned from the Indians about finding water, and built something that can survive years like this one." Eliza's afternoons were often spent exploring the ranch grounds, sometimes on foot and increasingly on horseback as she rediscovered skills she had learned as a girl. Marcus had given her a gentle mare named Rosie, and she found that riding across the vast landscape brought her a sense of freedom she had almost forgotten existed. It was during one of these rides that she encountered her first real challenge as the ranch's new mistress. She had ventured farther from the main house than usual, following a creek that meandered through a section of grazing land. when she came upon two of the hired hands engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument. Jake Morrison and Pete Hendricks were among the younger men on the crew, and from what Eliza could observe, their disagreement had escalated beyond mere words. Jake was brandishing a branding iron in a threatening manner while Pete circled him with his fists raised. "That's enough," Eliza called out, guiding Rosie closer to the two men. "Put that iron down immediately." Both men turned to stare at her, clearly surprised to find the boss's new wife witnessing their confrontation. Jake lowered the branding iron but maintained his aggressive stance. "This ain't your concern, ma'am," he said with barely concealed insolence. "This is ranch business." "Everything on this ranch is my concern," Eliza replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "Now one of you is going to explain what this is about, and then we're going to resolve it like civilized men." Pete, the younger of the two, spoke first. "Jake's been saying the new herd count is off, and he's implying that someone's been helping themselves to Mr. Hawthorne's cattle. He's basically calling me a thief." "I ain't implying nothing," Jake shot back. "I'm saying it straight out. Cattle don't just disappear into thin air, and you've been mighty interested in those southern pastures lately." Eliza considered the situation carefully. She could order both men back to work and report the incident to Marcus, but that would likely solve nothing and might undermine her authority in future situations. Instead, she decided to address the problem directly. "Jake, what makes you think the count is incorrect?" "I've been working cattle for 15 years, ma'am. I know how to count, and I know when numbers don't add up right." "And Pete, why have you been spending time in the southern pastures?" The young man's face reddened. "There's good grass down there, and I thought maybe we weren't using it to full advantage. I was just trying to be thorough in my work." Eliza studied both men for a long moment. "Here's what we're going to do. Jake, you're going to teach Pete your counting system, and Pete, you're going to show Jake exactly where you've been riding and what you've observed. If there are missing cattle, we need to know about it. If there aren't, we need to clear the air between you two." Both men looked uncertain about the solution, but neither was willing to argue with the boss's wife. "And if I hear about either of you threatening the other with tools again," Eliza continued, "you'll both be explaining yourselves to Mr. Hawthorne personally. Are we understood?" "Yes, ma'am," they replied in unison. As she rode back toward the main house, Eliza felt a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness about her first real test of authority. She had handled the situation as best she could, but she knew that word of the incident would spread quickly among the ranch hands. Her response would be evaluated and discussed, and it would influence how the men treated her in future encounters. That evening, she decided to tell Marcus about what had happened rather than wait for him to hear about it from someone else. She found him in his study after dinner, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. "I had an interesting afternoon," she began, settling into the chair across from his desk. Marcus looked up from his paperwork, and she could see the moment when his expression shifted from casual interest to serious attention as she recounted the confrontation between Jake and Pete. "How do you think I handled it?" she asked when she had finished her account. Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his words. "You did well," he said finally. "Better than well, actually. Most people would have either ignored the situation or come running to me to solve it. You found a middle path that addressed the real issue while maintaining your authority. Do you think there really are missing cattle? It's possible. We've had problems with rustlers in the past, and Jake's got a good eye for numbers. But it's also possible that the cattle have just wandered farther than usual, looking for better grass." He closed the ledger and gave her his full attention. "Either way, you handled it correctly. The men need to know that you're someone to be respected, not just tolerated." As autumn progressed, Eliza found herself taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. She began keeping detailed records of household expenses and supplies, freeing Marcus to focus more of his attention on the livestock and land management aspects of the operation. She also started teaching basic reading and arithmetic to some of the younger ranch hands during the long winter evenings, a service that was greatly appreciated by men who had never had the opportunity for formal education. Her relationship with Marcus evolved slowly but steadily. They were not lovers in the passionate sense, but they had become genuine partners and companions. They shared meals, discussed ranch business, and had developed an easy rapport that felt comfortable rather than forced. Sometimes, sitting by the fire in the evenings while she worked on her needlework, and he read reports from cattle markets in distant cities, Eliza could almost forget that their marriage had begun as a business arrangement. It was during one such evening that Marcus brought up a subject that had been weighing on both their minds. "Eliza," he said, setting aside the newspaper he had been reading, "we should probably discuss the question of children." She looked up from her embroidery, her hands stilling on the fabric. They had been married for nearly 2 months, but their relationship remained chaste by mutual, unspoken agreement. "I want you to know that I have no expectations," he continued carefully. "Our agreement was for companionship and partnership, not necessarily for a traditional marriage in every sense. But if you ever feel ready for that aspect of our relationship, I want you to know that I would welcome it." Eliza set down her needlework and considered her response. She had been thinking about this very question herself, particularly as she observed the easy intimacy between some of the married couples in town. "I've been thinking about it too," she admitted. "This arrangement between us has worked out better than I dared hope. You've been kind and respectful, and I feel like we've built something good together." "But," Marcus prompted gently, "but I think we both know that what we have now is more like a comfortable friendship than a marriage. If we're going to change that, it should be because we both truly want to, not because we feel obligated by convention." Marcus nodded slowly. "What would help you decide?" Eliza smiled at his straightforward approach to what many people would consider a delicate topic. "Time, I think. And the knowledge that whatever we decide, it won't change the respect and partnership we've already established." "You have my word on that," Marcus replied seriously. "Whatever happens between us, you will always be my partner in this ranch and my equal in this household." As winter settled over the Montana territory, Eliza reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few short months. She had arrived as a desperate widow with few options and fewer prospects. Now she was the respected mistress of one of the territory's most successful ranches, with resources she had never imagined and responsibilities that challenged her in ways she found deeply satisfying. The transformation was far from complete, but already she could see glimpses of the woman she was becoming. Strong, confident, and valued not just for her domestic skills, but for her intelligence and judgment. As she watched the first heavy snow of the season blanket the landscape outside her bedroom window, Eliza Hawthorne smiled at the thought of what the coming year might bring. The harsh Montana winter of 1888 tested every aspect of the Lazy H ranch's operations. By February, snow had piled against the buildings in drifts taller than a man, and the temperature had dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being drawn from the wells. It was during this brutal season that Eliza truly proved her worth as more than just Marcus's wife. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning when Samuel Ridge burst into the kitchen where Eliza was reviewing supply inventories with Mrs. Coleman. His face was grim beneath his frost-covered beard, and his urgency was unmistakable. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we've got trouble. The main herd got spooked by wolves during the night and broke through the fence line. They're scattered across 3 sections of range, and with this storm coming in, we could lose half of them if we don't. Get them rounded up fast." Eliza felt her pulse quicken. She had heard enough dinner conversations to understand that losing cattle in winter was catastrophic for any ranching operation. "Where's Mr. Hawthorne? That's the problem. He left yesterday for Billings to negotiate that contract with the railroad, and he's not due back for 3 days. The telegraph lines are down, so we can't reach him." Without hesitation, Eliza set down her ledger and reached for her coat. "How many men do we have available?" Samuel looked surprised by her direct response. "Counting myself, 8 men. But, ma'am, this is dangerous work in weather like this. Men can get lost in a whiteout and freeze to death before anyone finds them. Then we'd better make sure that doesn't happen." Eliza turned to Mrs. Coleman. "Prepare hot coffee and food that can be carried easily, enough for 10 people. And heat stones to wrap in cloth. The men will need warmth they can carry with them." Over the next hour, Eliza orchestrated the rescue effort with a calm efficiency that impressed even Samuel. She assigned teams to different sections of the range, established a rotation schedule to ensure no one stayed out in the cold too long, and set up a communication system, using lantern signals to keep the scattered groups in contact. But her most crucial decision was to join the search herself, despite strong objections from several of the men. "Ma'am, with respect, this ain't work for a lady," protested Hank Williams, one of the senior hands. "If something happens to you out there, Mr. Hawthorne will have our hides. If we lose this herd, there might not be a ranch for Mr. Hawthorne to come back to," Eliza replied firmly. "I can ride as well as any of you, and you need every available person. Besides, I know these cattle. I've been watching them and learning their habits for months." She paired herself with Pete Hendricks, the young cowhand who had been involved in the confrontation with Jake Morrison the previous autumn. Pete had proven himself to be skilled with livestock and completely trustworthy, and Eliza suspected that having the boss's wife as his partner would motivate him to perform at his absolute best. The search was grueling and dangerous. Visibility was limited to a few yards in any direction, and the wind cut through even the heaviest clothing like a knife. But Eliza's intimate knowledge of the ranch's terrain, gained through months of daily rides, proved invaluable. She knew where the cattle were likely to seek shelter and which routes they would probably take when panicked. By late afternoon, they had located and gathered nearly 3/4 of the scattered herd. The remaining animals were in the most treacherous section of the range, where rocky outcroppings and steep ravines made both riding and herding extremely hazardous. "We should wait for better weather," Samuel suggested when they regrouped at the main corral. "It's too risky to go after the rest today." But Eliza had been calculating numbers in her head all day. "We can't afford to wait. Those cattle represent nearly $8,000 in value, and every hour they're out there increases the chance that we'll lose them permanently to the storm or to predators." She proposed a final push with 3 two-man teams, each responsible for a specific area. The plan was bold and carried significant risk, but it was also their best chance of saving the remaining livestock. As the teams prepared to head out for the final search, Jake Morrison approached Eliza with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I owe you an apology. I've been watching how you handle yourself today, and I was wrong about you when you first arrived. You got more sand than most men I know." The acknowledgement meant more to Eliza than she could express. Jake's respect had to be earned, and his words carried weight with the other ranch hands. The final push was successful. As darkness fell and the storm intensified, the last of the scattered cattle were driven safely into the protected corrals near the main buildings. Not a single animal had been lost, and perhaps more importantly, all the men had returned safely despite the dangerous conditions. That evening, as the ranch hands gathered in the bunkhouse to warm themselves and share stories of the day's adventure, Eliza found herself the center of their newfound respect. Mrs. Coleman had prepared a feast to celebrate their success, and for the first time since her arrival at the ranch, Eliza felt truly accepted as one of their own. When Marcus returned 3 days later, he found his ranch operating normally despite having weathered one of the worst storms in recent memory. Samuel's report of the crisis and its resolution left him speechless with a mixture of pride and amazement. "You saved the ranch," he told Eliza that evening as they sat in his study. If we had lost that many cattle, it would have taken years to recover. We all saved the ranch, she corrected gently. I just helped coordinate the effort. Marcus shook his head. Samuel told me how you took charge, how you organized everything, how you risked your own safety to help with the search. That wasn't just coordination, Eliza. That was leadership. Something had changed between them during his absence, and they both felt it. The partnership they had built was now based on genuine mutual admiration rather than just practical convenience. When Marcus reached for her hand across the small table between their chairs, Eliza didn't pull away. I've been thinking about what we discussed before I left, he said quietly, about the future of our relationship. Eliza felt her heart speed up, but her voice remained steady. So have I. I don't want to pressure you, but I need you to know that what I feel for you now goes far beyond respect and partnership. These last few months, watching you become such an integral part of this place, seeing your strength and intelligence. He paused, searching for the right words. I've fallen in love with you, Elisa, not with the idea of having a wife, but with you specifically. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Elisa studied his face, seeing sincerity and hope mixed with uncertainty. Marcus, she said softly, I've been asking myself the same questions. When you were gone these past few days, I realized how much I missed not just your presence, but your partnership, your conversation, your quiet strength. I think what I'm trying to say is that I love you too. The kiss they shared was different from the chaste peck at their wedding ceremony. It spoke of genuine affection and the promise of deeper intimacy to come. When they separated, both were smiling. So what happens now? Eliza asked. Now we stop pretending that this is just a business arrangement, Marcus replied. We become a real family. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities to the Lazy H Ranch. The cattle had survived the harsh winter in excellent condition, thanks in large part to the careful management during the storm crisis. Word of Eliza's leadership during the emergency had spread throughout the territory, earning her a reputation that extended far beyond her role as Marcus's wife. It was during the spring roundup that Eliza made her next major contribution to the ranch's success. While reviewing the breeding records and observing the new calves, she noticed patterns that even Samuel's experienced eye had missed. Marcus, look at these numbers, she said one evening, spreading breeding charts across the dining room table. The cattle from the northern pastures are consistently producing larger, healthier calves than those from the southern sections. Marcus studied the data she had compiled. What do you think accounts for the difference? I think it's the water. The northern wells tap into a different underground source, and I suspect the mineral content is better for pregnant cows. If I'm right, we could improve our entire herd's health by adjusting our breeding and grazing patterns. The theory seemed sound, but testing it would require significant changes to their established routines. Marcus trusted Eliza's judgment enough to authorize a pilot program involving a portion of their breeding stock. The results exceeded their most optimistic projections. The cattle managed according to Eliza's system produced calves that were not only larger and healthier, but also commanded premium prices at market. Within 2 years, the Lazy H Ranch had developed a reputation for producing some of the finest beef cattle in the Montana Territory. But Eliza's innovations extended beyond livestock management. She established a vegetable garden that not only fed the ranch's large workforce but also produced surplus crops that could be sold in town. She started a dairy operation that supplied fresh milk, butter, and cheese to nearby communities. She even convinced Marcus to experiment with raising sheep, despite the traditional rivalry between cattle ranchers and sheep herders. Diversification, she explained when some of the older hands grumbled about the addition of woolly animals to their operation. If cattle prices drop, we'll have other sources of income to keep us stable. By the summer of 1889, the Lazy H Ranch had grown from a successful cattle operation into a diversified agricultural empire. Eliza's business acumen and innovative ideas had not only increased their profits, but also made them one of the most respected and influential operations in Kosha. The entire territory, the transformation in their personal relationship had been equally dramatic. Marcus and Eliza had settled into a marriage that combined genuine love with shared purpose. They worked together as equal partners during the day and found comfort and affection in each other's arms at night. In August, Eliza discovered that she was expecting their first child. The news filled both of them with joy and anticipation, but it also brought new responsibilities and considerations. "We'll need to expand the house," Marcus said as they discussed their plans. "A nursery, of course, but also guest rooms for when your sister comes to visit, and perhaps a larger study where you can manage your growing responsibilities." "Our growing responsibilities," Eliza corrected with a smile. "This ranch belongs to both of us now, in every way that matters." As autumn arrived and Eliza's pregnancy progressed, she began training Mrs. Coleman and several of the other women in town to help manage the various enterprises she had established. She was determined that her temporary limitations would not slow the ranch's continued growth and development. It was during this period that she received an unexpected visitor. Margaret arrived unannounced one crisp October morning, traveling alone by train and stagecoach with a determination that reminded Eliza strongly of herself. "I couldn't stand another day in Cedar Falls," Margaret explained as they embraced on the front porch. "The town is completely dead now, and I've saved enough money from my work to make the journey. I was hoping you might have room for me here, at least until I can figure out what comes next." Eliza was delighted to have her sister close by, especially with the baby coming. But she was also struck by how much Margaret had matured during their year apart. The girl who had clung to her tearfully at the train station had been replaced by a confident young woman who had made her own difficult decisions and followed through on them. "Of course you're welcome here," Eliza assured her. "In fact, I can use your help with several projects I've been developing." As the year drew to a close, Eliza reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from desperate widow to prosperous ranch matriarch. She had not merely survived the transition, she had thrived, transforming both herself and everything around her. Standing on the porch of her expanded home, watching Marcus work with the horses in the corral while Margaret helped Mrs. Coleman with the evening meal preparations, Eliza placed a protective hand over her growing belly and smiled. The empire she and Marcus were building together would soon have an heir, and the dynasty they were creating would endure for generations to come. The shy widow who had been sold for grain was gone forever, replaced by a woman of substance, influence, and unshakable confidence. The transformation was complete, but the adventure was just beginning. The spring of 1890 brought both triumph and unexpected challenges to the Lazy H Ranch. Eliza had given birth to their son, William Thomas Hawthorne, during the depths of winter, and the boy had proven as strong-willed as both his parents. Now 3 months old, little William had already established himself as the undisputed ruler of the household, commanding attention from everyone from Marcus to the grizzled ranch hands who would stop their work to peek at him when Eliza carried him outside. But it was not domestic bliss that occupied most of Eliza's attention that spring. The territorial government had announced plans to survey and potentially redistribute large sections of ranch land to encourage smaller agricultural settlements, a development that threatened to destroy everything she and Marcus had built. "They want to break up the big ranches," Marcus explained grimly as he spread government documents across his desk. "The theory is that smaller farms will bring more settlers and more tax revenue to the territory." Eliza studied the proposed boundaries with growing alarm. The redistribution plan would cost them nearly 30,000 acres of their best grazing land, including the northern pastures where her water management innovations had proven so successful. Have other ranchers received similar notices? She asked. Every operation over 10,000 acres got one. But most of them don't have the political connections or resources to fight it effectively. That phrase sparked an idea in Eliza's mind. During her months of expanding the ranch's business relationships, she had cultivated friendships with bankers, merchants, and territorial officials throughout Montana. Perhaps it was time to leverage those connections for something more significant than cattle sales. What if we don't fight this individually? She proposed. What if we organize the ranchers into a collective voice that the territorial government can't ignore? Marcus looked skeptical. These men have been competing with each other for years. Getting them to work together won't be easy. Competition in business doesn't preclude cooperation when facing a common threat, Eliza replied. Besides, I have something they need. Over the following weeks, Eliza embarked on a diplomatic campaign that would have impressed seasoned politicians. She visited every major ranch within 100 miles, not as Marcus's wife seeking help, but as a businesswoman offering solutions. Her first stop was the Broken Arrow Ranch, owned by Clayton Rivers, a cantankerous widower who had been feuding with Marcus over water rights for the better part of a decade. Rivers received her in his study with obvious reluctance, but his skepticism began to fade as she outlined her proposal. You're suggesting we pool our resources to hire lawyers and lobbyists? Rivers asked. I'm suggesting we demonstrate to the territorial government that breaking up our operations would be economically disastrous for everyone involved. Eliza corrected. We represent hundreds of jobs, thousands of dollars in annual tax revenue, and the primary economic engine for dozens of small towns. If we present a unified case backed by solid financial data, they'll have to listen. But Eliza's real masterstroke was her offer to share the water management techniques that had made the Lazy H so successful. The drought had continued to plague the region, and every rancher was struggling with ways to maintain their livestock during increasingly dry conditions. You'd share your methods with competitors? Rivers asked suspiciously. I'd share them with partners, Eliza replied. If we're going to work together politically, we need to trust each other economically. By midsummer, Eliza had organized the Montana Cattlemen's Association, a formal alliance of 23 ranch operations representing over 500,000 acres of grazing land. The association hired prominent lawyers from Denver and Chicago, commissioned economic impact studies, and launched a coordinated campaign to influence territorial policy. But their most effective weapon was Eliza herself. Her reputation as an innovative ranch manager had spread throughout the territory, and her ability to articulate complex economic concepts in terms that politicians could understand made her the association's natural spokesperson. The confrontation came in August when the territorial legislature convened in Helena to debate the land redistribution proposal. Eliza arrived at the Capitol with a comprehensive presentation that included detailed financial projections, employment statistics, and testimonials from local business owners who depended on the ranching industry. Governor Benjamin Harrison, not to be confused with the U.S. president of the same name, was a former businessman himself, and he listened with obvious interest as Eliza outlined the economic consequences of the proposed land seizures. Mrs. Hawthorne, he said when she had finished her presentation, your arguments are compelling, but there's significant pressure from Washington to increase settlement in the territory. How do you propose we balance those concerns with the interests of existing landowners? Eliza had anticipated this question. Governor, I propose a compromise that serves both objectives. Instead of forcibly redistributing existing ranch land, why not open new territories to settlement while providing incentives for the ranchers to voluntarily sell portions of their holdings to qualified farmers? She went on to outline a detailed plan that would create new agricultural settlements on previously unused land while allowing the established ranches to maintain their core operations. The plan included provisions for shared water resources, cooperative marketing arrangements, and technical assistance from experienced ranchers to help new farmers succeed. The governor was intrigued enough to delay the vote on the original proposal while a committee studied Eliza's alternative plan. Over the following weeks, she worked closely with territorial officials to refine the details and address potential objections. The final compromise legislation, passed in September, was hailed as a model of practical problem-solving. It opened thousands of acres of new land to settlement while protecting existing ranch operations, and it established cooperative programs that benefited both large and small agricultural operations. "You've done something remarkable," Marcus told her the evening after the vote. "You've turned potential enemies into allies and created a solution that nobody thought was possible." But Eliza's political success had come at a personal cost. The months of travel and negotiation had kept her away from home for extended periods, and she worried about the impact on both William and her relationship with Marcus. "I've been thinking about the future," she said as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "The association is established now, and other people can handle the day-to-day operations. I want to focus more on our family and the ranch." Marcus smiled and took her hand. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but I've missed having you here. William's missed you too, though he's too young to say so." As if summoned by the mention of his name, little William began crying from inside the house, and Eliza went to tend to him. As she nursed her son in the comfortable rocking chair beside his crib, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that desperate day in Cedar Falls 3 years earlier. The autumn of 1890 brought new opportunities for the Lazy H Ranch. The success of the Cattlemen's Association had established Eliza as one of the most influential women in the Montana Territory, and she began receiving invitations to serve on various boards and committees. The most intriguing offer came from the Territorial Banking Commission, which was seeking someone with her combination of business acumen and political connections to help regulate the growing financial sector. The position would require only occasional travel to Helena and could be largely managed through correspondence. It would give us significant influence over credit policies and investment priorities. Eliza explained to Marcus. "That could be valuable for the ranch and for the entire agricultural sector." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You'd essentially be helping to shape the economic development of the entire territory." "Exactly. And the position pays well enough to fund some expansion projects I've been considering." Those expansion projects were ambitious indeed. Eliza had been studying the railroad development patterns throughout the West, and she believed that a rail line connecting their area to the main transcontinental routes would transform the regional economy. "If we could attract railroad investment to this area," she explained to the other association members during their quarterly meeting, "we could reduce transportation costs by 70% and open up markets that are currently impossible to reach." The proposal required coordinated lobbying efforts by multiple ranches and substantial financial commitments from each participating operation. But Eliza's track record of successful negotiations gave the other ranchers confidence in her ability to deliver results. Over the winter months, she worked with railroad executives, territorial officials, and financial backers to develop a comprehensive plan for the new rail line. The negotiations were complex and often frustrating, but her persistence and attention to detail gradually overcame the various obstacles. The breakthrough came in February 1891, when the Northern Pacific Railroad agreed to extend a branch line to their region in exchange for guaranteed shipping, contracts from the Cattlemen's Association, and partial financing from territorial development funds. "This changes everything," Margaret observed as they discussed the implications over dinner. "A railroad connection will make this area accessible to markets we never could have reached before." Margaret had proven herself to be an astute business partner during her months at the ranch. She had taken over much of the dairy operations management and had developed new products like aged cheeses that commanded premium prices in distant markets. "I've been thinking," Margaret continued, "that we should consider establishing a processing facility here on the ranch. If we can add value to our products before shipping them, we could increase profits substantially." The idea was intriguing, and Eliza spent several weeks researching the possibilities. A meat processing plant would allow them to ship finished products rather than live cattle, potentially doubling their profit margins. Combined with Margaret's dairy expansion plans, it could transform the Lazy H from a ranch into a complete agricultural enterprise. But the most significant development that spring was entirely unexpected. Eliza discovered that she was pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy proved more challenging than her first. Dr. Matthews, who had moved to the area specifically to serve the growing population, recommended reduced activity and frequent rest. "I'm concerned about the strain you've been under," he told her during a routine examination. "The political work, the business development, caring for William, it's too much for someone in your condition." The diagnosis forced Eliza to delegate many of her responsibilities to Margaret and Marcus, a situation that left her feeling frustrated and restless. She was accustomed to being in control of every aspect of their operations, and watching from the sidelines while others made important decisions was almost unbearable. "You've built something that can function without your constant oversight," Marcus reminded her gently. "That's not a weakness, it's a sign of excellent leadership." The forced period of reduced activity gave Eliza time to reflect on their accomplishments and plan for the future. In less than 4 years, she had transformed herself from a desperate widow into one of the most powerful and respected figures in the Montana Territory. The Lazy H Ranch had grown from a successful cattle operation into a diversified agricultural empire, and her political influence extended far beyond their local area. But perhaps most importantly, she had created a loving family and a genuine partnership with Marcus that brought her happiness she had never thought possible. As summer arrived and her pregnancy progressed, Eliza began planning for the next phase of their expansion. The railroad would reach their area within 2 years, opening up unprecedented opportunities for growth. The meat processing facility was moving forward with financing secured and construction scheduled to begin after the harvest season. "We're building something that will last for generations," she told Marcus one evening as they watched William take his first tentative steps across the parlor floor. "Not just a business, but a legacy." Marcus smiled and placed his hand protectively over her growing belly. "Our children will inherit an empire that you created through vision and determination. They'll grow up knowing that anything is possible if you're willing to work for it." As the sun set over the vast expanse of their domain, Eliza allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The shy widow who had been sold for grain had become the undisputed empress of one of the most successful and influential ranching operations in the American West. But more than that, she had discovered her own strength and created a life filled with purpose, love, and unlimited possibilities for the future. The winter of 1892 arrived early and with unprecedented fury, bringing challenges that would test every innovation and alliance Eliza had built over the past 5 years. Her daughter, Catherine Rose Hawthorne, had been born healthy and strong the previous October, but the brutal weather threatened not just the ranch's livestock, but the entire regional economy that Eliza had helped create. The first sign of trouble came in November, when the new railroad line that had been completed just 6 months earlier became blocked by avalanches in the mountain passes. Without access to their primary shipping route, the meat processing facility that Eliza had championed was suddenly cut off from its major markets. "We've got 3 months' worth of processed beef sitting in cold storage with nowhere to send it," reported James Crawford, the facility manager whom Eliza had recruited from Chicago. "If we can't find alternative shipping routes soon, we'll lose everything. The crisis extended far beyond the Lazy H Ranch. The 23 operations in the Cattlemen's Association were all facing similar problems. And smaller ranchers who had invested heavily in the railroad expansion were on the brink of bankruptcy. Eliza found herself in the unique position of being both a victim of the crisis and the person everyone expected to solve it. Despite having given birth just 2 months earlier, she threw herself into finding solutions with characteristic determination. Her first breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Among the many letters of congratulation she had received after Catherine's birth was one from Victoria Sterling, the wife of a prominent shipping magnate in San Francisco. Victoria had heard about Eliza's work with the Cattlemen's Association and had written to express admiration for her achievements. "Mrs. Sterling," Eliza wrote in response, "I wonder if your husband's company might be interested in a mutually beneficial arrangement during our current transportation difficulties." The correspondence that followed led to an innovative solution. Sterling Shipping agreed to establish a temporary overland freight route that would carry processed goods to coastal ports, where they could be shipped to markets in California and the Pacific Northwest. The arrangement required coordination between multiple shipping companies and significant logistical planning, but it offered a lifeline during the railroad blockade. However, negotiating the deal required Eliza to travel to San Francisco in the depths of winter, leaving her newborn daughter for the first time. The decision was agonizing, but the economic survival of dozens of ranching families hung in the balance. "Mrs. Coleman will care for Catherine as if she were her own granddaughter," Marcus assured her as they prepared for her departure. "And Margaret has become an expert at managing the dairy operations. The ranch will be in good hands." The journey to California was treacherous, requiring multiple stagecoach transfers and river crossings on routes that were barely passable in winter conditions. But when Eliza finally arrived in San Francisco, she found herself in a city that was experiencing explosive growth and hungry for the kind of high-quality agricultural products that Montana ranchers could provide. Victoria Sterling proved to be a formidable businesswoman in her own right, and the two women quickly developed both a profitable partnership and a genuine friendship. The shipping arrangement they negotiated not only solved the immediate crisis, but also opened up entirely new markets for Montana beef and dairy products. "You've created something remarkable in Montana," Victoria told her during their final meeting. "Most people see the Western Territories as sources of raw materials to be processed elsewhere. You've built a complete production system that adds value at every stage." But Victoria's most valuable contribution was introducing Eliza to other influential women who were quietly shaping business and politics throughout the West. Sarah Mackenzie ran a successful mining operation in Colorado, while Helen Rodriguez had built a shipping empire that connected Mexico with markets throughout the American Southwest. "There are more of us than most people realize," Victoria explained during a dinner that brought together a dozen successful businesswomen. "We operate in different industries and different regions, but we face similar challenges and opportunities." The informal network that grew out of these connections would prove invaluable in the years to come. These women shared information about market conditions, investment opportunities, and political developments that affected their businesses. More importantly, they provided each other with moral support and practical advice for navigating the male-dominated world of Western commerce. When Eliza returned to Montana in March, she found that the emergency shipping arrangements had not only solved the immediate crisis but had proven so successful that they should be continued even after the railroad reopened. "We're getting better prices for our processed goods in California than we ever did shipping to Chicago," Margaret reported excitedly. "And the demand is so strong that we could probably double our production capacity and still sell everything we can make." The success of the alternative shipping routes had an unexpected consequence. It attracted the attention of major Eastern investors who were looking for profitable opportunities in the rapidly developing West. By summer, Eliza was fielding inquiries from financiers in New York and Philadelphia who were interested in investing in the Montana agricultural industry. They want to buy partnerships in existing operations rather than starting from scratch, Eliza explained to the Cattlemen's Association members during their quarterly meeting. They've seen our success with value-added processing and diversified operations, and they want to replicate it. But the Eastern investors were not content to simply provide financing. They wanted active roles in management and substantial influence over business decisions. For many of the independent-minded ranchers, this represented an unacceptable loss of autonomy. We didn't build these operations to hand control over to city bankers who don't understand the first thing about cattle ranching, declared Clayton Rivers, who had become one of Eliza's strongest allies in the association. Eliza agreed with the sentiment, but she also recognized the potential benefits of strategic partnerships with well-funded investors. The challenge was structuring deals that provided access to capital while preserving local control over operations. Her solution was characteristically innovative. Instead of selling partnerships in individual ranches, she proposed creating a regional investment fund that would be controlled by the Cattlemen's Association, but financed by Eastern capital. The fund would provide loans and equity investments to member ranches while maintaining local ownership and management. We become the intermediaries between the Eastern money and the Western operations, she explained. We evaluate investment opportunities, structure deals, and ensure that the money is used effectively. The investors get access to profitable opportunities without having to manage them directly, and we maintain control over our own operations. The Montana Agricultural Development Fund, as it came to be known, was launched in the fall of 1892 with $2 million in initial capital from investors in New York, Philadelphia, and San Francisco. Eliza was elected as the fund's first president, a position that made her one of the most powerful financial figures in the entire territory. The fund's first major investment was in expanding the meat processing facility to handle products from ranches throughout the region. The expansion created hundreds of new jobs and established the facility as one of the largest food processing operations west of the Mississippi River. But Eliza's most ambitious project was still to come. During her travels and correspondence with business leaders throughout the West, she had become convinced that the future of the region lay not just in agriculture, but in integrated economic development that combined farming, ranching, mining, and manufacturing. We have all the raw materials needed for a complete industrial economy, she explained to Marcus one evening as they reviewed development plans spread across their dining room table. Iron ore from the northern mines, coal from the eastern deposits, timber from the mountain forests, and agricultural products from the ranches. What we need is the infrastructure to bring it all together. Her vision involved creating an industrial complex near the railroad junction that would include not just expanded food processing facilities, but also textile mills that could process wool from the region's growing sheep operations, lumber mills that could handle timber from the mountain forests, and even a steel foundry that could serve the construction needs of the rapidly growing Western territories. The scope of the project was staggering, requiring investments of over $10 million and coordination between dozens of different businesses and government agencies. But Eliza had spent 5 years building the relationships and reputation needed to make such an ambitious undertaking possible. The breakthrough came when she convinced the territorial government to designate the area as a special economic development zone with tax incentives for businesses that located their operations there. Combined with the investment capital available through the Agricultural Development Fund and the transportation infrastructure provided by the railroad, the incentives attracted commitments from companies throughout the region. You're not just building a business, observed Dr. Matthews during one of his regular visits to check on Catherine's development. You're building an entire city. Indeed, the industrial complex that Eliza was creating would require housing for thousands of workers, schools for their children, and all the commercial and civic infrastructure needed to support a major population center. The project represented nothing less than the creation of a new, metropolitan area in the heart of the Montana Territory. As 1893 dawned, construction was beginning on the first phase of what local newspapers had begun calling Hawthorne City, though Eliza insisted that the official name should be New Helena, to honor the territorial capital. The meat processing facility was operating at full capacity. The Agricultural Development Fund was financing expansion projects throughout the region, and the railroad was carrying record volumes of freight to markets throughout the West. But, perhaps most importantly for Eliza personally, she had achieved something that would have been unimaginable when she first arrived as a desperate widow 6 years earlier. She had become not just wealthy and powerful, but genuinely influential in shaping the development of an entire region. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't taken that banker's offer back in Cedar Falls? Marcus asked. One evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching William chase fireflies while baby Catherine slept peacefully in her crib, Eliza considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes, but I've learned that dwelling on alternate histories is less useful than focusing on future possibilities. She gestured toward the lights of the growing town that was taking shape around their ranch. 6 years ago, I was worried about having enough money to buy flour for next week's bread. Now we're creating opportunities for thousands of families to build better lives than they ever thought possible. Marcus smiled and took her hand. You've become exactly what that title suggested, the Empress of an empire that you built from nothing. As the stars appeared in the clear Montana sky, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The shy widow who had been sold for grain had indeed become a ranch empress. But more than that, she had become an architect of the American West's future. And this was only the beginning of what she planned to accomplish. The summer of 1893 brought unexpected turbulence to the financial markets that threatened to unravel everything Eliza had built. The Panic of 1893, triggered by railroad overbuilding and silver price collapses, sent shockwaves throughout the American economy. Banks failed, businesses shuttered, and unemployment soared to levels not seen since the Civil War. In Montana, the crisis hit with particular severity. Many of the Eastern investors who had funded the Agricultural Development Fund suddenly found themselves unable to meet their financial commitments. 3 major banks that had provided construction loans for the industrial complex declared bankruptcy within a single week, leaving half-completed projects without funding and hundreds of workers without wages. We're looking at complete economic collapse, warned Theodore Brennan, the fund's treasurer, during an emergency meeting in Eliza's study. If we can't find alternative financing within 30 days, we'll have to halt construction on everything and lay off over 2,000 workers. But Eliza had been monitoring the warning signs for months through her network of businesswomen across the West. While the Eastern financial markets were in freefall, Western banks that had been more conservative in their lending practices remained relatively stable. More importantly, the demand for Montana's agricultural and processed goods had actually increased as other regions struggled with production shortfalls. The crisis is also an opportunity, she told the assembled Cattlemen's Association members. Companies that can maintain operations during the downturn will capture market share from competitors who are forced to shut down. Her strategy for weathering the financial storm was audacious in its scope. Instead of retrenching and cutting operations, she proposed accelerating the industrial development project by forming new partnerships with Western financial institutions and international investors who were looking for stable opportunities outside the volatile Eastern markets. The key breakthrough came through her friendship with Victoria Sterling, whose shipping empire had extensive connections throughout the Pacific region. Victoria introduced Eliza to a consortium of British and Australian investors who were seeking profitable opportunities in American agriculture and industry. The British are particularly interested in beef processing operations, Victoria explained during a telegram exchange. The demand for American beef in England has been growing steadily, and they're willing to pay premium prices for guaranteed supply contracts. But negotiating with international investors required a level of financial sophistication that even Eliza found challenging. The contracts involved complex currency exchange provisions, international shipping arrangements, and legal frameworks that spanned multiple countries. To handle these complexities, she recruited Alexandra Morrison, a Scottish-educated lawyer who had recently moved to San Francisco after working for international trading companies in Hong Kong. Alexandra proved to be not only brilliant at financial law but also invaluable in navigating the cultural expectations of British business practices. These investors are accustomed to dealing with established commercial houses that have been operating for generations, Alexandra explained as they prepared for negotiations. They need to be convinced that your operation has the stability and reliability they require for long-term partnerships. The solution was to restructure the entire Montana enterprise as a formal corporation with international backing and professional management. The Hawthorne Agricultural Corporation, as it was chartered, combined the resources of the original ranch, the meat processing facility, the various subsidiary operations, and the industrial development project into a single entity that could attract serious international investment. The negotiations took place in San Francisco over the course of 6 weeks, with Eliza dividing her time between business meetings and managing her family responsibilities. She had brought both children and Mrs. Coleman to California, turning the extended stay into an opportunity to expose William and Catherine to experiences beyond the Montana frontier. The final agreement was more favorable than Eliza had dared hope. The British consortium agreed to provide £1.5 million in development capital in exchange for a 40% stake in the corporation and guaranteed supply contracts for processed beef exports. Australian investors contributed an additional £500,000 for exclusive rights to distribute Montana dairy products throughout the Pacific region. But the most significant aspect of the agreement was that it established Eliza as the corporation's chief executive, making her the first woman to hold such a position in a major international business enterprise. The appointment attracted attention from newspapers throughout the United States and Europe, cementing her reputation as one of the most influential business leaders of her generation. Mrs. Hawthorne has demonstrated that American ingenuity and determination can create commercial success even during times of national economic distress, reported the San Francisco Chronicle. Her achievement represents not just personal triumph, but proof that the American West continues to offer opportunities for those bold enough to seize them. Returning to Montana with international backing secured, Eliza found that the crisis had actually strengthened her position in several unexpected ways. Smaller ranchers who had been skeptical of her industrial development plans were now eager to participate, recognizing that diversification was essential for survival in uncertain economic times. The construction workforce, grateful for steady employment when jobs were scarce throughout the country, had developed a fierce loyalty to the Hawthorne Corporation and its projects. Productivity had actually increased during the crisis, as workers understood that their economic security depended on the success of Eliza's ambitious vision. "We're not just building factories and warehouses," she told the workers during a morale-building gathering. "We're creating a foundation for prosperity that will last long after the current economic troubles have passed." The industrial complex took on new urgency as businesses throughout the region sought ways to reduce costs and increase efficiency. The textile mill began operations in October 1893, processing wool from local sheep ranchers into finished cloth that could compete with products from Eastern manufacturers. The lumber mill followed in December, turning timber from mountain forests into finished building materials for the growing western settlements. But Eliza's masterstroke was the establishment of a regional bank that could provide financial services to businesses and individuals throughout Montana. The Frontier Bank of Montana, capitalized with funds from the international investors and backing from the Hawthorne Corporation, offered an alternative to the failed Eastern banks that had previously dominated the territory's financial sector. Local control of financial resources is essential for sustainable economic development, she explained to territorial officials who had initially questioned the need for another bank. We can't build a stable economy if all our major financial decisions are made by people who have never seen our region and don't understand our needs. The bank's first major initiative was a loan program for small farmers and ranchers who had been unable to obtain credit from traditional sources. The program included technical assistance and business planning support, helping borrowers develop sustainable operations that could repay their loans while building long-term prosperity. Margaret, who had proven herself to be an astute business manager, was appointed as the bank's vice president for agricultural lending. Her experience with dairy operations and her understanding of small-scale farming made her ideally suited to evaluate loan applications and provide practical advice to borrowers. I never imagined when I left Cedar Falls that I would end up running a bank, Margaret confided to Eliza during one of their evening walks around the ranch. But I've learned that opportunities often come in forms we don't expect. The success of the bank and the industrial complex attracted attention from territorial and federal officials who were looking for models of economic development that could be replicated in other western regions. In early 1894, Eliza was invited to testify before a congressional committee that was studying ways to promote economic growth in the frontier territories. Her appearance in Washington, D.C. was a sensation. The sight of a woman addressing Congress on matters of high finance and industrial policy was unprecedented, and her articulate presentation of Montana's development strategies impressed even skeptical legislators. The West requires different approaches to economic development than those that have succeeded in the established eastern states, she testified. We must build integrated systems that can function independently rather than remaining dependent on distant financial centers that may not share our interests or understand our needs. The congressional testimony led to her appointment to a federal advisory committee on Western development, making her one of the few women to hold a formal position in the federal government. The appointment carried significant influence over the allocation of federal resources for territorial development and infrastructure projects, but perhaps the most satisfying recognition came from an unexpected source. The University of Chicago, one of the nation's most prestigious academic institutions, offered her an honorary doctorate in recognition of her contributions to economic development and business innovation. Dr. Hawthorne, as she was now formally addressed, had achieved a level of recognition that transcended regional boundaries. Her innovations in agricultural processing, industrial development, and financial services were being studied and replicated throughout the American West and even in other countries. As 1894 drew to a close, Eliza stood on the observation deck of the new administration building that crowned the industrial complex, surveying the empire she had created. The complex employed over 3,000 people and generated annual revenues exceeding $5 million. The Frontier Bank had assets of over $10 million and had financed development projects throughout Montana and neighboring territories. The town that had grown up around the complex now boasted a population of 12,000, complete with schools, churches, a hospital, and all the amenities of a modern city. The railroad depot handled more freight traffic than any other station between Chicago and Seattle, and passenger service connected the community to major cities throughout the United States. It's hard to believe this all started with a desperate widow selling herself for grain, Marcus observed as he joined her on the observation deck. Eliza smiled, though her gaze remained fixed on the bustling activity below. I think it started long before that. It started with the realization that survival requires more than just enduring hardship. It requires transforming circumstances into opportunities. As the winter sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Eliza reflected on the distance. She had traveled from that humble beginning in Cedar Falls. The shy widow had indeed become an empress. But more than that, she had become an architect of the American dream, proving that vision, determination, and courage could transform not just individual lives, but entire regions. The empire was secure, the legacy was established, and the future held limitless possibilities for continued growth and innovation. The transformation was complete, but the adventure would continue for generations to come. The dawn of the 20th century found Eliza Hawthorne at the pinnacle of her influence. But it also brought challenges that would test the permanence of the empire she had built. William, now 13, and Catherine, 8, were growing up in a world vastly different from the frontier settlement their mother had first encountered. The question that increasingly occupied Eliza's thoughts was how to prepare the next generation to inherit and expand upon her achievements. The immediate catalyst for these concerns came in the spring of 1900, when a consortium of Eastern industrialists, led by railroad magnate Jonathan Blackstone, made an unprecedented offer to purchase the entire Hawthorne Agricultural Corporation for $25 million. The sum represented more wealth than most people could comprehend, but it also represented the potential end of everything Eliza had worked to create. "They're not just buying a business," Eliza explained to Marcus during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "They're buying the power to control the economic development of this entire region. If we sell, every decision about jobs, wages, expansion, and community development will be made by people who have never lived here and don't understand what we've built." But the offer had attracted attention from shareholders and board members, who saw it as an opportunity to realize enormous profits on their investments. The British and Australian investors in particular were pressuring Eliza to accept the deal, arguing that the corporation had achieved its growth potential and that further expansion carried unnecessary risks. "Mrs. Hawthorne," wrote Sir Reginald Ashworth, the lead representative of the British consortium, "while we admire your vision and accomplishments, we must consider our fiduciary responsibilities to our own investors. The Blackstone offer represents a return on investment that exceeds our most optimistic projections." The pressure intensified when several key executives within the corporation began advocating for the sale. Even Theodore Brennan, who had worked closely with Eliza for years, argued that accepting the offer would allow them to invest in new opportunities without the constraints of managing such a large and complex organization. "We could take the money and start fresh," he suggested during a tense board meeting. "Maybe focus on newer technologies, like the electrical power generation that's becoming so important in the cities." But Eliza had not built her empire simply to cash out at the first substantial offer. She had created something that went beyond personal wealth, a sustainable economic ecosystem that provided opportunity and prosperity for thousands of families. Selling to Eastern industrialists would likely mean job cuts, wage reductions, and the extraction of profits to distant shareholders, rather than reinvestment in local development. Her response was characteristically bold. Instead of fighting the sale directly, she proposed a management buyout that would transfer ownership from the international investors to the corporation's employees and the local community. The plan would use innovative financing structures, including profit-sharing agreements and community development bonds, to maintain local control while providing fair returns to the existing investors. "What you're proposing is revolutionary," observed Alexandra Morrison, who had become Eliza's primary legal advisor. "Employee ownership of major industrial enterprises is virtually unknown in American business. "Everything we've done here has been unprecedented," Eliza replied. "We've proven that unconventional approaches can succeed when they're based on sound principles and careful planning." The buyout negotiations required 18 months of complex financial maneuvering, but they ultimately succeeded in transferring majority control of the corporation to a trust controlled by employees and community representatives. The structure ensured that future business decisions would prioritize long-term sustainability and community benefit rather than short-term profit maximization. However, the most significant development during this period was not financial but educational. Eliza had become increasingly convinced that the region's continued prosperity required an educated workforce capable of adapting to changing technologies and market conditions. Her solution was to establish the Montana Institute of Technology, a comprehensive educational institution that would provide both practical training and advanced academic programs. "We need more than just workers," she explained to the Territorial Education Committee. "We need engineers, scientists, business managers, and other professionals who understand both the opportunities and challenges of Western development." The institute was built on land donated by the Hawthorne Corporation and funded through a combination of corporate contributions, federal grants, and private donations from successful alumni of Eliza's various enterprises. The curriculum combined traditional academic subjects with practical training in agriculture, engineering, business management, and the emerging field of electrical technology. But Eliza's most innovative educational initiative was the creation of scholarship programs specifically designed to encourage young women to pursue advanced education and professional careers. The Hawthorne Foundation, established with a substantial endowment from her personal wealth, provided full scholarships to qualified women who committed to returning to the region after completing their studies. "Education is the key to permanent prosperity," she told the Foundation's first board meeting. "If we can develop local talent instead of depending on outside expertise, we can maintain control over our own economic destiny." The Foundation's first scholarship recipients included her own daughter, Catherine, who had shown remarkable aptitude for mathematics and engineering despite her young age. At 12, Catherine was already auditing classes at the Institute and demonstrating an understanding of complex technical concepts that impressed even seasoned professors. "She has your mind for seeing possibilities that others miss," Marcus observed as they watched Catherine explain her design for an improved irrigation system to a group of adult engineering students. "But she's growing up in a world where such opportunities for women will be more accepted." William, meanwhile, had developed interests that seemed to complement his sister's technical aptitude. At 15, he was already working part-time in various departments of the corporation, learning the practical aspects of business management while completing his academic studies. His particular strength was in understanding the human dynamics of large organizations and finding ways to motivate people toward common goals. "Different talents, but both essential for what we're building," Eliza noted with satisfaction. The early years of the new century also brought significant changes to the broader political landscape. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and the new state government was increasingly responsive to the economic and political influence that Eliza had cultivated. When the state legislature began considering new regulations for industrial development, Eliza found herself in the position of helping to shape policies that would affect not just her own enterprises but the entire state's economic future. Her most significant political achievement was the passage of the Montana Sustainable Development Act, legislation that established environmental and social standards for industrial operations, while providing incentives for businesses that demonstrated long-term commitment to community welfare. This law ensures that economic development serves the people of Montana rather than just outside investors, she explained during the legislative debate. It creates a framework for growth that can be sustained for generations rather than boom and bust. cycles that leave communities devastated when market conditions change. The act became a model for similar legislation in other Western states and attracted attention from reformers throughout the country who were seeking ways to address the social and environmental costs of rapid industrialization. But perhaps the most personal satisfaction came from seeing the communities that had grown around her. Various enterprises developed their own cultural and civic institutions. The town of New Helena now boasted an opera house, a public library, 2 newspapers, and a thriving arts community that attracted visitors from throughout the region. "We've created more than just jobs and prosperity," Margaret observed during one of their regular family dinners. "We've created a place where people can build complete, fulfilling lives." Margaret had continued to expand her own role within the organization, developing expertise in international finance that made her invaluable for managing the corporation's growing overseas operations. She had also married Dr. Charles Patterson, a professor at the Montana Institute who shared her interests in sustainable agriculture and community development. As 1902 dawned, Eliza found herself increasingly focused on ensuring the continuity of everything she had built. At 43, she was still energetic and ambitious, but she was also acutely aware that permanent success required institutions and systems that could function independently of any single individual. Her solution was to establish a formal succession plan that would gradually transfer operational responsibility to the next generation while maintaining the principles and values that had guided the corporation's development. William would eventually assume responsibility for the business operations, while Catherine would lead the technical and engineering divisions. Margaret would continue managing the financial and international aspects of the enterprise. "Each of you brings different strengths," she explained to the 3 young people who would inherit her empire. "But you all share the understanding that business success means nothing if it doesn't contribute to the welfare of the communities and people who make it possible." The formal transition began in 1903, when William was appointed as Assistant General Manager and Catherine became the youngest department head in the corporation's history, overseeing the newly created Research and Development Division. Margaret was elected to the Board of Directors and given responsibility for expanding operations into new international markets. But even as she began delegating operational responsibilities, Eliza continued to pursue new initiatives that would extend her influence into the future. Her latest project was the establishment of a network of similar enterprises throughout the American West, each adapted to local conditions, but sharing the principles of sustainable development and community ownership that had made the Montana operation successful. "We're not just building a business empire," she told a gathering of Western entrepreneurs and investors. "We're demonstrating that American capitalism can serve the common good while generating prosperity for everyone involved." By 1904, Hawthorne Model enterprises were operating in Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and California, each contributing to regional development, while maintaining the employee ownership and community focus that had become Eliza's trademark. The network generated combined revenues of over $50 million annually and employed more than 20,000 people throughout the West. Standing once again on the observation deck of the administration building, now accompanied by her children and Margaret, Eliza surveyed an empire that had far exceeded even her most ambitious early dreams. But more importantly, she had created something that would endure long after she was gone, a system of institutions and values that would continue generating opportunity and prosperity for generations to come. The shy widow who was sold for grain is completely gone now, Marcus said, echoing her thoughts from years earlier. "No," Eliza replied with a smile. "She's still here. She's just grown into someone who understands that true power comes not from what you can accumulate for yourself, but from what you can create for others." As the sun set over the vast landscape that had become her domain, Eliza Hawthorne stood as the undisputed empress of an empire built on vision, determination, and an unwavering commitment to proving that extraordinary achievements were possible for anyone willing to transform necessity into opportunity. The year 1907 brought both triumph and tragedy to the Hawthorne Empire in ways that would test the very foundations of everything Eliza had built. The triumph came in the form of international recognition when she was invited to address the World's Fair in Jamestown, Virginia, as one of the featured speakers on American industrial innovation. The tragedy struck just 3 weeks later when Marcus was thrown from his horse during a routine inspection of the northern ranges and suffered injuries that would change their lives forever. The accident occurred on a crisp October morning when Marcus was accompanying a team of veterinarians investigating reports of a disease outbreak among the cattle herds. His horse, normally reliable and calm, was spooked by a rattlesnake and reared suddenly, throwing Marcus against a boulder-strewn slope. The impact left him paralyzed from the waist down, ending his active participation in the physical demands of ranch management at the age of 54. "The doctors say there's no chance of recovery," Marcus told Eliza with characteristic directness during their first private conversation after the accident. "You need to understand what this means for our plans and our future." But if Marcus expected his disability to fundamentally alter their partnership, he had underestimated both Eliza's loyalty and her adaptability. Within weeks of his return from the hospital in Denver, she had reorganized their living arrangements to accommodate his limitations while ensuring that his intellectual contributions to the enterprise remained central to its operations. "Your mind built this empire as much as your physical efforts did," she reminded him. "If anything, this gives you more time to focus on the strategic planning that's always been your greatest strength." The modifications to their home and offices became a model for accommodating disabled individuals in the workplace, years before such considerations became common practice. Eliza commissioned the construction of ramps, wider doorways, and specially designed furniture that allowed Marcus to maintain his dignity and effectiveness despite his physical limitations. More importantly, she restructured the corporation's management hierarchy to formally recognize Marcus as Chief Strategic Officer, a position that leveraged his analytical skills and deep understanding of regional economics while acknowledging that the physical demands of day-to-day operations now fell entirely to her and their children. William, now 20, had matured rapidly in response to the family crisis. His natural leadership abilities and thorough understanding of the corporation's operations made him an obvious choice to assume greater responsibilities in field management and employee relations. Under his guidance, the various ranching operations maintained their productivity despite the disruption caused by Marcus's accident. Catherine, at 15, surprised everyone by developing innovative mechanical solutions to help her father maintain his independence. Her design for a hand-operated wheelchair that could navigate rough terrain became the prototype for similar devices that would eventually be manufactured and distributed to disabled veterans and other individuals throughout the country. "Engineering solutions should serve human needs," she explained to a gathering of professors and students at the Montana Institute. "The greatest technologies are those that expand possibilities for people who face limitations." But the most significant test of the empire's resilience came not from the family crisis, but from external economic pressures that threatened to undermine the carefully constructed network of enterprises that Eliza had built across the American West. The Panic of 1907, triggered by failed speculation in copper mining stocks, created a cascade of bank failures and business bankruptcies that reached even the previously stable Western territories. Unlike the earlier financial crisis of 1893, this downturn struck at the heart of the regional economy that Eliza had worked so hard to create. The copper mines that supplied raw materials to several of her manufacturing operations shut down when Eastern investors withdrew their capital. Railroad shipping rates increased dramatically as the rail companies struggled with their own financial difficulties. Even the agricultural markets, which had remained relatively stable during previous downturns, experienced severe price volatility that threatened the profitability of farming and ranching operations. "We're facing a coordinated attack on everything we've built," reported Alexandra Morrison during an emergency board meeting. "The Eastern financial interests that we've managed to keep at bay for so long are using this crisis as an opportunity to force us into unfavorable consolidation deals." The crisis required Eliza to deploy every skill and resource she had accumulated over the past 2 decades. Her first move was to convene an emergency meeting of the Western Enterprise Network, the informal alliance of Hawthorne model businesses that had spread throughout the region. The meeting, held in Salt Lake City, brought together over 50 business leaders who controlled enterprises employing more than 40,000 people. "We can survive this crisis individually, but we can thrive through it collectively," Eliza told the assembled entrepreneurs. "What I'm proposing is a coordinated response that turns our geographic distribution into a competitive advantage rather than a vulnerability." Her plan involved creating a mutual support system where profitable operations in one region could provide temporary financing and resources to struggling enterprises in other areas. The arrangement required unprecedented cooperation between traditionally competitive businesses, but it also offered the possibility of emerging from the crisis stronger and more unified than before. The centerpiece of the mutual aid program was a regional banking consortium that could provide credit and financial services without depending on the unstable Eastern financial markets. The Western Development Bank, capitalized with contributions from all member enterprises, began operations in early 1908 with Eliza serving as its founding president. "We're creating our own financial infrastructure," she explained to skeptical federal banking regulators who questioned the legality and stability of the new institution. "The West has grown large enough and prosperous enough to support its own banking system, independent of the boom and bust cycles that seem to plague the Eastern markets." But the bank was only one component of a comprehensive strategy that included cooperative purchasing agreements, shared transportation resources, and coordinated marketing efforts that allowed Western enterprises to reduce costs while maintaining quality and service standards. The success of these initiatives attracted attention from economists and business theorists throughout the country who were struggling to understand how regional economies could maintain stability during national financial crises. Eliza found herself invited to lecture at Harvard Business School, Columbia University, and other prestigious institutions where her innovations in cooperative economics were studied as potential models for national economic reform. "Mrs. Hawthorne has demonstrated that business cooperation and community ownership can provide stability and prosperity that traditional competitive capitalism often fails to achieve," wrote Professor Daniel Richardson of the University of Chicago. In his influential study of Western economic development, the academic recognition led to her appointment to a federal commission, studying ways to prevent future financial panics through improved regulation and coordination between regional economies. The position gave her a platform to advocate for policies that would protect Western communities from the destructive effects of Eastern financial speculation. But perhaps her most significant achievement during this period was the establishment of what became known as the Hawthorne Principles, a formal code of business ethics that emphasized long-term sustainability, employee welfare, and community development over short-term profit maximization. The principles were adopted by over 200 businesses throughout the West and became the foundation for a new approach to corporate responsibility. "Business has obligations that extend beyond generating returns for investors," she stated in her keynote address to the National Association of Manufacturers. "We have responsibilities to our employees, our communities, and future generations that must be balanced against the pursuit of immediate profits." As the decade progressed, the success of these innovations attracted international attention. Delegations of business leaders and government officials from Canada, Australia, and several European countries visited the Hawthorne enterprises to study their management practices and economic development strategies. The most significant international recognition came in 1909, when King Edward VII awarded Eliza the Order of the British Empire for her contributions to international commerce and economic development. The ceremony, held at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., made her one of the first American women to receive such an honor for business achievements. Mrs. Hawthorne represents the finest traditions of American enterprise and innovation, declared Ambassador James Bryce during the presentation ceremony. Her work has created prosperity not only for her own country but for British investors and trading partners throughout the empire. But for all the external recognition and international honors, Eliza's greatest satisfaction continued to come from the daily evidence of prosperity and opportunity that surrounded her in Montana. The town of New Helena had grown to over 30,000 residents and had been officially incorporated as a city with its own mayor, city council, and municipal services. The Montana Institute of Technology had expanded to include graduate programs in engineering and business administration, and its graduates were founding successful enterprises throughout the American West. The original ranch that had brought her to Montana 22 years earlier was now just one component of a vast network of agricultural, industrial, and financial enterprises that employed over 50,000 people and generated annual revenues exceeding $100 million. More importantly, the employee ownership structure she had pioneered ensured that the wealth generated by these enterprises was distributed throughout the communities where they operated rather than concentrated in the hands of distant investors. "We've proven that American capitalism can serve the common good," she told Marcus during one of their evening conversations on the porch of their home. "But more than that, we've shown that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they're given the opportunity and support they need to succeed." Marcus, his strategic mind undimmed by his physical limitations, had become the corporation's chief long-term planner and was already developing scenarios for the challenges and opportunities that would face the enterprise in the coming decades. "The automobile is going to change everything," he predicted as they discussed future development plans. "When people can travel easily between cities and regions, it will create opportunities for businesses that can serve broader markets while maintaining local connections." As 1910 approached, bringing with it new technologies and social changes that would reshape American society, Eliza could look back on more than 2 decades of unprecedented achievement. The desperate widow who had arrived in Montana with nothing but determination and courage had become one of the most influential business leaders in American history. But more than personal success, she had created a model for economic development that prioritized community welfare and environmental sustainability alongside business profitability. The empire she had built was indeed designed to last forever, not because it concentrated power in the hands of a single family, but because it distributed opportunity and ownership throughout the communities it served. Standing once again en couture, the observation deck that had become her favorite place for reflection, Eliza watched the sun set over a landscape transformed by vision and determination. The shy widow was gone, replaced by an empress whose empire would endure not through conquest, but through the creation of lasting value for all who participated in success. 20-5 years had passed since Eliza Whitmore first stepped off the train at Millbrook Station, a desperate widow with nothing but hope and determination. Now in the spring of 1912, Eliza Hawthorne stood before a gathering of over 500 business leaders, politicians, and dignitaries who had come to New Helena to celebrate the silver anniversary of the Hawthorne Agricultural Corporation and witness something unprecedented in American business history. At 53, Eliza had decided to step down as chief executive of the corporation, transferring operational control to William while retaining the newly created position of chairman emeritus. But this was not a typical corporate succession. Instead, she was implementing the final phase of her revolutionary ownership transition plan, converting the corporation into the first major employee-owned cooperative in American industrial history. 25 years ago, I was sold for grain. Because I had no other options, she began her address to the assembled crowd. Today, 5,000 employees will receive ownership shares in one of the most successful enterprises in the American West, not because they were purchased, but because they earned them through their contributions to our collective success. The transformation was staggering in its scope. Every employee who had worked for the corporation for more than 2 years would receive ownership shares proportional to their length of service and level of responsibility. The plan ensured that future profits would be distributed among those who actually generated them, while maintaining the reinvestment strategies that had fueled the corporation's growth. William, now 25 and seasoned by years of progressively greater responsibility, had embraced his mother's vision of democratic capitalism with enthusiasm that surprised even longtime observers. His first act as chief executive was to establish worker councils in every division, giving employees direct input into workplace policies and business strategies. My mother taught me that true leadership means creating opportunities for others. To lead, he told the New York Times reporter, who had traveled west to cover the unprecedented ownership transition. The corporation's success has always depended on the talents and dedication of our entire workforce, and now the ownership structure reflects that reality. Catherine, now 20, had completed her engineering degree at the Montana Institute and was already revolutionizing the corporation's technical operations. Her innovations in agricultural machinery had increased productivity by 40%, while reducing the physical demands on workers. More remarkably, she had established the first industrial research laboratory in the American West, where teams of engineers and scientists developed new technologies for agriculture, manufacturing, and transportation. The future belongs to organizations that can adapt and innovate continuously, she explained during a demonstration of her latest invention, a motorized harvesting machine that could perform the work of 20 men in half the time. We're not just competing with other businesses, we're racing against our own potential to create better solutions for the challenges we face. Margaret, now 38 and a respected financier in her own right, had expanded the Western Development Bank into a regional powerhouse with assets exceeding $50 million. Her marriage to Dr. Patterson had produced 2 children who were already showing signs of inheriting the family's entrepreneurial spirit and social consciousness. The bank has become more than a financial institution, she reflected during the anniversary celebration. It's become a catalyst for sustainable development throughout the entire region. We financed over 300 new businesses in the past 5 years, and our loan default rate is less than 2% because we invest in people and communities, not just business plans. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the emergence of what economists were calling the Montana Model, a comprehensive approach to regional development that balanced economic growth with environmental sustainability and social equity. Universities throughout the United States and Europe were sending students and researchers to study the Hawthorne enterprises and the communities they had helped create. The model's success was undeniable. New Helena had become the largest city between Denver and Seattle, with a diversified economy that included manufacturing, agriculture, education, finance, and emerging industries like automobile production and electrical power generation. The unemployment rate was virtually zero, the literacy rate exceeded 90%, and the city boasted cultural amenities that rivaled those of much larger metropolitan areas. We've created something that transcends traditional economic categories, observed Dr. Edmund Wilson, a Harvard economist who had spent 6 months studying the Montana model. It's not pure capitalism, because ownership is distributed among workers and communities. It's not socialism, because individual initiative and innovation are rewarded and encouraged. It's something entirely new, a synthesis that captures the benefits of both systems while avoiding their weaknesses. The success had not gone unnoticed by political leaders. Progressive reformers throughout the country were advocating for policies based on the Hawthorne principles, and several states had passed legislation encouraging employee ownership and cooperative business structures. Even President Woodrow Wilson had requested a private meeting with Eliza to discuss how federal policies might support similar developments in other regions. Mrs. Hawthorne has demonstrated that American enterprise can serve broader social purposes without sacrificing efficiency or profitability, the president told his cabinet after their meeting. Her innovations may point the way toward resolving some of the tensions between labor and capital that have become so problematic in our industrial centers. As the anniversary celebration concluded and the dignitaries departed, Eliza found herself once again on the observation deck that had become her favorite place for reflection. But this time, she was not alone. Marcus, despite his physical limitations, had insisted on joining her for this moment of transition and contemplation. "Do you remember what you said that first night when you decided to accept my proposal?" he asked, his hand finding hers as they looked out over the empire they had built together. "I said that sometimes the heart follows where necessity leads," Eliza replied, smiling at the memory. "I had no idea then what that simple decision would create, and now I understand that necessity was just the beginning. What we've built here grew out of something much more powerful, the conviction that every person deserves the opportunity to achieve their full potential, and that business can be a force for creating those opportunities rather than limiting them." Below them, the lights of New Helena twinkled in the gathering dusk, each one representing a family, a dream, a life made better by the vision and determination of a woman who had refused to accept that desperation was the end of her story. The original ranch house, now preserved as a historical landmark, stood as a reminder of humble beginnings that had grown into something magnificent. "The children will carry it forward," Marcus said with quiet confidence. "But they'll do it in their own way, facing challenges we can't even imagine yet." "That's as it should be," Eliza replied. "We didn't build this to last forever because it would never change. We built it to last forever because it can adapt and grow with each new generation." As the stars appeared in the clear Montana sky, Eliza Hawthorne could reflect on a life that had exceeded every reasonable expectation. The shy widow who had been sold for grain had become not just a ranch empress, but a visionary leader whose innovations in business, economics, and social organization would influence American development for generations to come. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that extraordinary achievement was possible for anyone willing to transform necessity into opportunity, desperation into determination, and personal success into shared prosperity. The empire was secure, the legacy was established, and the future belonged to those who would continue building on the foundation she had laid. The transformation was complete, but the story would continue forever, written by new generations who would carry forward the principles and possibilities that one remarkable woman had carved from the raw frontier of the American West. In the end, Eliza Hawthorne had achieved the rarest of accomplishments. She had changed not just her own life, but the very definition of what was possible in the land of opportunity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.